Hey, Erica. All right. And it looks like it worked today. Hooray. All right. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. And if you're happening to catch the replay, please let me know in the comments. Just put a hashtag replay. I'm excited because I have been trying to figure out how to go live on all the places. And I think I actually figured it out. So I say hello to my folks on Facebook. And I believe if you post, I should still be able to see you, Facebook friends. So let me know if you're here, and my LinkedIn folks, and also YouTube folks as well. And over here, Instagram. So, hey, everybody. Um, it's Tuesday evening, and I've been going live every Tuesday in November for conversations about equity in music education with Ashley. So I'm Ashley Cuthbertson. I use the pronouns she and her. And I'm so glad that you are joining me today. I pulled out 4 questions to answer for today. These questions came from a PD I did earlier this year where I had music teachers from all disciplines. So I tried to pull some things that are geared for my ensemble folks and things that are for my general music folks. And so hopefully, regardless of where you may be lying, you have something that you can kind of connect with today. And so I'm going to go ahead and start answering those questions. But also, if you are here, please let me know if you have a question that you want me to answer live, and we can be in a little bit of dialogue together to chat more about whatever your question might be. I wonder if I can get rid of this. Yeah, there we go. Something weird is popping up. Okay, so let me know in the comments if you have a question that you want me to answer live. I see a few more people are popping in. So hey, I'm just getting started. And I'll just answer those as I see fit. So I would love to get into conversation. So let me know what you want to chat about. So if you just happen to be new to me, I'll tell you a little about myself before I jump in. So as I said before, I'm Ashley Cuthbertson. I use the pronouns she and her, and I am a music educator. I'm located here in the DC, Northern Virginia, Maryland area, and I've been a music educator for over 12 years, teaching literally infants through adults. Primarily, I taught elementary, general music, and choir, but I also worked with literally infants. I taught preschool, as well as musicianship that went all the way through seniors in high school. I was a private lessons teacher. I was an elementary band teacher for a hot second when I taught in DC. And I'm also an adjunct professor. I teach courses at some universities in the Baltimore, Maryland area. But now I full-time work to support music educators in implementing culturally responsive and accessible practices into their curriculum and instruction through my consulting company, Cuthbertson Consulting. So I work full-time now as an educational consultant, and it has been quite an adventure to be an entrepreneur, but also to meet music teachers literally from across the US and also internationally now as well. I have some international folks to really help music teachers to have the support that they need, right? So one thing that is really hard for us as music teachers is that because our schedules are so jam-packed, and we have so many things that we are both doing that are like part of our contract time, but we know also as music educators, we often do things that are not maybe necessarily part of our our contract time. It's really hard to get in quality professional development. And even when we do have the time, it's hard to know, like, who do we even go to for really great quality, high quality music development for music educators. And so I founded my company to solve that problem. And I've been so excited to be able to serve my colleagues better in this capacity. So let's jump into the very first question. And again, if you got questions, let me know in the comments. The first one is, how do you validate the source of repertoire? And I love this question because I know, especially as us as a music education community, we're trying to do better as far as making sure that we're selecting music that is not just appropriate and diverse for our students, but also that we make sure that we're not appropriating somebody else's culture. Oh, you know what? I meant to look this up, but I forgot to. I know we also want to make sure we're not promoting composers who are masquerading as being something that they're not. So I'm trying to remember the name of the composer. It was a white man composer who was writing under a pseudonym, if you want to call it that, but a false name to make it sound like he was an Asian woman. So we want to make sure that we're not doing that kind of thing, like that we know what we're going for. And so my answer to the question is that we need to make sure that we know the who, what, when, where, why, and how of the music that we are engaging our students in. And that's the floor. I think the very least we can do is very quickly do a Google search or in the resource book, if we have a great resource where we found it, to just make sure that we know who created this music. And if it was a composed piece, making sure that because we have the name of the person, right? So making sure you actually look into who that person was. So some of that issue, and I wish I remember the name of that composer that I was talking about, the white man who was masquerading as the Asian woman. I wish I remember the name. So if you remember their name, drop it in the comments for me. But some very simple, probably just Google searching would have solved that problem, right? To look into, well, who even is this person? And not a whole lot of information would have been found because that wasn't a real person, right? So know who the person is. Now, some music that we're engaging in is folk music. And so there's not one composer, right? So we can still do our due diligence as far as looking into, well, like who are the people of the culture of which the music is, right? We want to make sure we also know like what the music is even about. When was it created? What was going on in the time that the music was created? That context is really important so that we understand the purpose and also how we're going to perform it. Why, the reason for why that music came to be, the location. So where did this music come from? Where in the world? Some of that's answered by, like, if it's a folk piece of music, that might already be answered. If we know the composer, that'll also be answered then. But then also like the how, right? So how do we make sure that we validate our repertoire? We have to do our due diligence. And I know that a major issue that we have in our music ed community is that we just don't have enough high quality, robust, printed, or even electronic resources that give this information to us. The good news is that there are some people working on that. And so there is some work being done, and there are some resources that we can look to, but the easy kind of thing for us right now is just to make sure that we utilize our free tools, i.e. Google, to make sure that before we're presenting music to our students that we have authenticated it. And that's just making sure we know the who, what, when, where, why, and how. All right, I see a couple other people are joining me. Hey, let me know if you're here in the comments. I just answered our first question of the night, which was, how do you validate the source of repertoire? And I would love to get in conversation. So if you have a question, please drop it in the comments, and I will answer them live. So here's the second question. How do you apply culturally responsive teaching in a guitar classroom? And I picked this one specifically because I love the specificity of this question. And so regardless of the specific discipline, I think it's important for me just to name that culturally responsive teaching isn't tied to any particular discipline. It's not tied to music. It's not tied to social studies or language arts. There's a particular thing. So I look to the work of Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings and her theory of culturally relevant pedagogy, which developed from her research of teachers who were getting it right with Black students, right? So she was looking at these students, and these teachers are high performing. Like, what are these teachers doing that's successful with these Black students? And her theory evolved from that. And so there's three parts to her theory. The first is academic achievement or student learning. Second is cultural competence. And the third is social political consciousness. So when we think about our music classrooms, and in particular, this participant asked about in their guitar classroom, how do we embed culturally responsive teaching, culturally relevant pedagogy? We look to student achievement. And so for us as music educators, that means that we're looking at, we're looking at musically wise concepts and skills. What are the musicianship skills and attributes that we're going to cultivate within our students, and what kinds of things concretely, like music concept wise, are we going to be teaching and that they're going to be demonstrating that they know and understand? So that doesn't go away. I think sometimes folks get confused about culturally responsive teaching and think it's very like woo, and it's not, right? We're standards-based teachers. We are looking at what standards we're going to utilize and what specific musical concepts and skills we're going to be teaching, right? So that's the first thing. In a guitar classroom, that will look like guitar specific concepts and skills, right? So I'm not sure if this person that just said guitar, but if it's more of a classic guitar class, there's classical guitar techniques, right? If it's more of like a pop or a rock kind of guitar class, there's other techniques. But I would assume that there's going to be, fingerboard work. I assume that there's going to be I would hope that there would be some reading of like tab or maybe some sort of notation. right? There's going to be technique of like strumming and different things. So student learning and achievement, that has to be there, right? Then we look at cultural competence. And cultural competence does not need to be scary in our music rooms, but also in our music rooms, being culturally competent also does not mean that we are just diversifying our repertoire. I'm going to keep saying this. Just diversifying your repertoire is not culturally responsive. That's more along the lines of multiculturalism, which is also great because we do want to do things from a variety of genres and styles and peoples, right? To broaden our students' horizons. But the problem with people getting music teachers specifically thinking that just diversifying our repertoire is how we do it, because if you don't look at your pedagogical practices, if you don't look at the way you are facilitating your learning environment, you could very well be teaching a very problematic way, even though you're teaching, diverse repertoire. So just diversifying your repertoire isn't it. However, I will also say that part of being culturally competent is learning how other cultures interact, not just race and ethnicity, right? Culture is multifaceted, just like identity, but looking at how skillfully one can understand and develop understandings, but also empathy for the ways that other people go. Dr. Latson-Billings, I've heard her say many times that really we don't want we want our students to be, in our adults, to be culturally competent within your own culture, but we also want to facilitate gaining cultural competence in at least one other culture, kind of like being biculturally competent, right? So do we understand how the experiences of multiple kinds of people, how multiple people walk through the world, right? And even in a guitar classroom, that is possible, right? So that's where repertoire choice can kind of help us. So are you choosing repertoire that allows you to have conversations about a variety of kind of identities? Again, not just race and ethnicity, but are you picking things that allow you to open the door to talk about how a variety of people, move in the world, right? So repertoire can help us with that. Again, it's not the end, because if your pedagogical practices are problematic, then we have an issue there as well. But the content choice can kind of help us open the door to having those conversations about other people, other experiences, other ways of being. And then third, social political consciousness. So what are we doing to actually make meaning of the musical tasks that we're engaging our students in? So in this case, a guitar classroom. So what topics from the music, right? The music is still the center. So what social political topics are you connecting to the music that your guitar students are learning, right? How are you helping students to see that music and the skills that we're gaining through music are applicable beyond just the four walls of our classroom? And just saying to students that we need to learn, finger style technique on the guitar, that's not enough of a reason to make the music matter, because that's assuming already that students are bought into why finger style like practice and technique is important, right? There has to be something before that. So social political consciousness is important, one, to make the meaning for students and to show them how beyond the four walls of our music classrooms, what we're learning is applicable. Additionally, we want our students to be well-informed, compassionate, empathetic members of our global society. And so we don't want them going out there and not being able to separate, fact from fiction in the media that they're seeing. And through our music classrooms, even guitar, we can still help our students to build those things. So one thing for my guitar teacher here who asked that question, I would encourage you to do in your guitar classroom is to really think critically about the music that you're choosing. How is the music that you're choosing allowing you to make connections to students' self-identity? Again, not just race and ethnicity, but the variety of identities. How is the music that you're choosing allowing you to have discussions about connections to the identity of others? And how is the guitar music, the repertoire you're choosing, allowing you to connect to social, political kinds of topics and things? A good resource to look at is my own. So on my website, ashleycuthbertson.com, I do write a blog, and I have a growing number of blog posts on a variety of things, but I specifically talk about repertoire and curriculum, mostly because that's my area of genius, but also because I think it's important for music educators to have really clear examples of what this looks like. So I would encourage anyone that's looking for because I know in this time I'm just kind of going quickly through these questions, but I have I think I have one full unit plan with all the lessons that I have on my website. I think that's my Happy Birthday Dr. King, so it should be probably January 2022 if you're looking for that. But I have lots of other curriculum examples of what this looks like to connect to identity, to connect to cultural competence, and to connect to social political themes, even in our music classroom, right? So my guitar teacher friend here, I would encourage you to look at that, but also think, how are you making those connections to the parts of culturally relevant pedagogy that I just mentioned? And also, how are you making the music actually matter? Just saying that we need to learn to read the notes on the staff is not a good enough reason because you can play the guitar without understanding the notes on the staff, right? So how are you going to make the music actually matter to the students in front of you? That's how we move more towards culturally responsive teaching, not just diversifying our repertoire. All right. Well, I'm so glad that it's enlightening, and thank you for being here, Bree. All right. So I am just answering questions. And so if you have any questions about how do we center culturally responsive and accessible practices to ensure equity in our music classrooms, drop them in the comments. I have a couple more questions that I pulled from a PD I did earlier this spring. And so I'll just keep rolling. And if you got questions, I would love to have a little conversational dialogue. So just let me know. If you're just coming in, I answered first, how do you validate the source of repertoire? And then I was just talking about how do we apply culturally responsive teaching to a guitar classroom? So we look at the third question. What does culturally responsive teaching look like in a performance-emphasized program? I get this question quite often. You know, my background is infant to adult, but primarily K to 12. So I taught preschool for a little while, and I'm an adjunct professor. And a lot of my time was spent in the elementary classroom. So just naturally, with my lens, I tend to do a lot of creating of curriculum and working with elementary teachers. But I also was a band teacher for a hot minute. And I also understand the way that performance-oriented classrooms need to work, right? So a lot of times in our performance-oriented classrooms, the pressure is on to perform for the concert, right? Or to perform for the adjudicated festival, right? And so I know it can feel like culturally responsive teaching is an add-on or an extra thing to do in a performance-oriented classroom. However, I encourage you to reframe that thought. And instead of thinking that, oh, I got to add this culturally responsive thing, instead reframe it, because the highest quality programs that are able to attract students to their program, and we see kids coming in, right, engages the students who are there, and more importantly, retain students. And we see, you know, unfortunately with the pandemic, so many of our music ensembles in public schools have been decimated, right? Because of just the pandemic and all of that went through that, right? And so it's been hard on music ensembles. I was just talking to a choir friend of mine who it's like rebuilding programs, right? Rebuilding healthy programs. And now after the pandemic, how do we carry on? And so in a performance-oriented classroom, I would suggest you to reframe thinking that culturally responsive teaching is an add-on, and instead think about how culturally responsive teaching, making the music matter for your students, connected through their cultural filter, their cultural frames of reference, and making it clear that what you're doing in music class is connected to, you know, bigger themes in the world that will serve them in their life, not just in the four walls of their classroom. I encourage you to think about how that's going to be the thing that's going to allow you to attract, engage, and retain students. Centering culturally responsive practices, that's the way to do it, right? Without making the music matter for our kids, that's going to be hard, especially in programs that are trying to rebuild, right? Because if students don't see why music class matters, or why being in the band matters, or being in the choir or the orchestra matters, they're not going to want to join, right? And then it's going to be hard for you to carry on with your program when you don't have kids coming in and you don't have kids who are staying, right? So I encourage you, instead of thinking that culturally responsive teaching is an add-on or it's an extra thing, culturally responsive teaching is the thing. It's how we make it matter. And when kids see that what we are doing in our music classrooms matters, it's connected to them, that's when we can attract more kids, because other kids will see how much fun is happening in your band or orchestra or guitar classroom or choir. And that's going to engage the kids who are there so that we can retain them and start to really rebuild our programs, right? So culturally responsive teaching is not an extra thing, it's the thing. I know it's difficult when we have performances that we're preparing for and things like that. But instead of thinking like that is an extra, how can the way that you approach creating a concert program be more connected to the subject matter that kids want to explore through music, connected to the themes that students want to actually learn about through the musical choices that you make? I encourage you to think, instead of, I need to pick so many grade 4 pieces or so many grade 3 pieces for the festival, how can I pick pieces that my students will connect with and will allow us to have conversations and engage in meaningful music making beyond just learning how to read the notes on the page or just playing the notes that we see them, like really making it matter for them. That's how we are going to have healthy, thriving music programs at the ensemble level, by making it matter, right? And I encourage you also to look on my blog. I did a whole series on performance-oriented classrooms back in March 2022. So I have several blog posts that I wrote about programming structures, some tips as far as in our performance-oriented classrooms, what culturally responsive teaching could look like. So I know it can be kind of nebulous to think about how do we apply culturally responsive practices like social political consciousness? How do we apply things like cultural competence, right? So please know that if you go to my blog, I have a whole series that I did back in March about what that would look like. Let me see. I did write some notes here, but I don't think I even looked at the notes. Let me see. Yeah, I think I mostly said what I want. Yeah, how can we make it matter? That's like the most important thing. And even in our performance-oriented classrooms, we can absolutely do that. And it's important for us to do that, right? That's how we attract, engage, and retain our students so that we can have great programs. All right. So I see a couple people join me over here. Thank you. And I see a few people over here on, looks like, I think it's either Facebook or LinkedIn. I can't tell, but hey, I'm just chatting. I pulled up some questions from a recent or a PD I did in the spring, actually. I tried to pick some questions across disciplines. And so I answered, how do you validate the source of repertoire? How do you apply culturally responsive teaching to a guitar classroom? And the last question I was just talking about was, what does culturally responsive teaching look like in a performance emphasized program? So if you have a question, I'm going to answer one more that I wrote down. Feel free to put it in the comments because I would love to have a little conversation. I see a couple people looking. So let me know if you want to jump in and have a little dialogue back and forth. But here's the last question for today. What are some ways to help students promote advocating for their needs and being seen? What are some ways to help students promote advocating for their needs and being seen? And so I love this question because I think it really speaks to an important part of culturally responsive and relevant practices that I think music teachers, we are very quick to gloss over. Because again, I think that we get so caught up in diverse repertoire. And again, just diversifying repertoire is not culturally responsive, as I said before. But I think we get caught up in that part that we forget that part of culturally responsive pedagogy and culturally responsive practices calls on us to make sure that we are cultivating a sense of belonging with our students, right? It doesn't matter how diverse our repertoire is or how beautifully designed our lesson plan is if students don't even want to engage in your classroom, right? And a lot of that shows up as like behavior issues, right? Or disengagement issues. I put the quotes up because a lot of times I think we put the onus on the students instead of looking at our pedagogy, which is not engaging them because they don't feel like they belong, right? And so again, it doesn't matter how diverse repertoire is, how beautifully designed your lesson is, if your learning environment is not hospitable to cultivating belonging with students. And so a couple of things to think about. And I was going to share a story. I wrote it down in my notes. So when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking about several years ago now. I think these students have probably graduated high school by now, but I was thinking several years ago now about a class of sixth graders that I worked with, and I had been their music teacher for many years prior to that. So I felt very comfortable with them. They felt very comfortable with me. We vibed pretty well. And at this particular school and this particular year, my school was piloting a personalized learning program that was more focused on teachers building the skills and dispositions to be able to do personalized learning. And then we would do things with the kids. And so at this school, all of the sixth grade team, all of the fifth grade team, I think a couple of other teachers from other grade levels, me as a music teacher. So we had, I think, 3 specialists. So me as a music teacher, one of the PE teachers, and I think maybe the librarian. I'm not remembering exactly, but I know that it was more than just me and the PE teacher. We were all part of this pilot program using this professional development. It was like a learning management system where they would have lessons that we would learn, and then we would do it. Because my sixth graders were so used to having lots of voice and choice in the way that they were learning, they were not used to whole group kinds of instruction. They were more used to working on their own for a little bit, working in small groups, being very self-directed, right? Personalized learning calls for us to help students really personalize their learning because they were so used to that because that's how all of their teachers were teaching them. By the way, these sixth graders also it was almost like a middle school schedule for them, even though we were in elementary school. So they switched like rooms for math and science and whatever. And then they would come to like music class, and I was doing the similar thing. So less whole group kinds of instruction, more, not necessarily projects, but more like, here's a task musically. Let's figure it out in groups or individually, things like that. And I remember one lesson in the spring, so like almost the whole school year, and one lesson in the spring, I was doing kind of a precursor to what my kind of big PBL I often do with my fifth and sixth graders, which was a PBL on project-based learning project on movement and form, where they served as choreographers and then picked music and choreographed it. And they had choice as far as how they wanted to choreograph it, like either dancing or by percussion, props, that they had choice. But before that, some of the work I did with them was being able to listen to music and analyze the form more independently, creating and doing different things. So I remember this one lesson, I think we were doing I can't remember if it was maybe like, I think it was an Aaron Copland piece. And I had like these slides, and for whatever reason that day on my smart board, I usually can control things right from the board, but I was having to like go back and forth to my desk, which wasn't far, by the way. My desk was like right next to the board. But like in the time that I would like turn to like hit the button on my computer, and by the way, I was still talking, right? But hit the button on the computer to stop and start the music, like they kept getting off task. And so I was saying to them, like, I was mic'd because I often taught with a voice amplification system. And so I was saying to them, like, y'all, I know you can hear me. I'm noticing that we're having a hard time getting through our task here because a lot of talking is happening in between. And I remember one of my students, one of my lovely, lovely students, she was like, Miss C, we know what we need to do here. Like, we get that we need to create movement, and you normally just let us do it. So I think we should just let us do it, and then we can talk, and like we don't have to keep starting and stopping. And I remember she was just like so clear, like, just let us do it. And I was like, you know what? She's 100% right. Like, of course, I'm a teacher, I'm a human being. I had a whole lesson plan, but she was right. For whatever reason that day, I forgot that there was kind of a way that we had been working together, and I was taking them steps back, right? I was taking them away from having voice and choice and towards more of a teacher-directed approach. And she very clearly advocated for what she felt like she and her classmates needed. The reason I tell you this story is because I think this is a really clear example of, because I had been centering student voice and choice and just normalizing it, like, here in this room, expect for me to be asking for you to speak up. Expect for me to be giving you lots and lots of choice. I had normalized, like, this is just how we do things, so that when I did the opposite, like, she felt comfortable and confident enough to speak up, because I had been making that a normal thing, that I want to hear from you. I want you to give me your opinion. I want you to have choice, right? And so I think when we think about what are ways to help students advocate for themselves and feel seen, is we have to just make it a normal thing in our classrooms that the teacher is not directing all of the things all the time. We need to center our students' voices. And that literally means that we need to hear from them. So we can't jam pack our lessons so full that there's no time for kids to like respond and share their opinion and their perspectives. We have to make space for that. And we have to make it normal. Like, the kids need to expect that they are going to be sharing, and they don't have to necessarily share verbally. There's other ways to communicate, but we need to make it normal that this is what we do. I think a lot of times in music classrooms, K-12, I don't think it's particular to elementary or middle school or high school. I think, music teachers, we are excited about the music we're going to teach, and we have our lesson or a rehearsal plan ready, and we get on the podium or whatever, and we go, 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 go. And we forget to like stop, engage the kids, make sure we're listening to them, and then more importantly, giving them actual choice. That's part of also how we help students to see how what we're doing matters, is by not always having to be the one directing, right? Because if we're always directing, we know why it matters, but then they don't, right? And so I wanted to just share that story as a really clear example of like what happens when I went backwards away from giving voice and choice. Because I had normalized it, she had no problem letting me know that this was not working. And she was clear about like why, right? Because I also had been clear about telling them, and I'm sure their teachers were too, that like, this is how we're going to be learning. Like, expect that you're going to be working independently or in groups more to problem solve through things instead of me always giving the information, right? So it was normalized in the classroom that that's just how we do things. So helping kids to advocate looks like making sure that we normalize and ask for voice and choice. Another thing is, especially if you work with younger students, we have to remember that younger students don't have the vocabulary or the words always to like describe what they are experiencing and be able to speak up. So especially with younger students, we need to both model how to speak up for ourselves, and we also need to give them like the words for how to say it. So like literally, I can remember being in my music classroom and saying to students, well, do you like that so and so just like pushed you over? Okay, well, you need to say to him, I don't like when you touch me, like giving them the actual words, because sometimes that's just a silly little, example, but sometimes with younger kids, we have to remember they don't necessarily they know they don't like the thing, but they might not have the vocabulary or the words to advocate and to speak up for themselves. But when we create classrooms where kids feel a sense of belonging, they know that we are looking to hear from them, looking to see how they're experiencing, what their opinions are. When we normalize that you belong here by showing them and by just making it a part of what we do, that's how we can help kids to advocate for themselves and help them to feel seen. But if we're not normalizing hearing from our students and wanting them to express their opinion, giving lots of choice and options for their learning, then it can be difficult for kids to feel like they belong and to feel like they can advocate and speak up for themselves. So that's what I would suggest to you. All right. So that's all the questions I had for today. Just looking to see if there's any questions in the comments. I don't see any. And so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you for those of you that popped in and out. And if you're watching the replay, thank you for listening to me talk on and on about some of the ways that we can make sure that our music education spaces are equitable and responsive culturally for all of our students. A couple of things I have coming up. So today is November 15th, by the way. And so in 10 days, actually, I'm so excited because I know that as I've been supporting music educators with professional development and curriculum and some general consulting kind of things, a common thing that we run into a lot is that we just don't always have the time in our schedule to be able to schedule PD sessions, right? And so I've been doing virtual workshops and things, and I have all these recordings. And so I decided to just make them available for folks to be able to access. And so the Music PD Library, as I'm calling it, is going to fully be live on November 25th, so in 10 days. I do have a wait list. If you're on Instagram, go to the link in my bio. If you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, somewhere around there, I'm sure there's a link. I'm sorry. If not, go to my website, ashleycuthbertson.com. And on, I think, that very first page, I have a link to the Music PD Library, and there's a link for you to sign up for the waitlist, because folks who are on my waitlist will have access to a bonus that I'm only going to make available to the waitlist folks. I'm very excited about it. I'm not going to announce it just yet, but if you're on the waitlist, you should be getting information about that soon. So as long as you're on the waitlist before November 25th, you'll get that bonus. And also a discounted access to the PD Library workshops only for 4 days. So November 25th, 26th, 27th, and 28th. And then it's going to go to its regular price. The PD Library is going to work like this. So you can purchase access for 3 months to the whole full library, which right now the whole full library is 8 workshops. And along with each workshop, there's downloads that I put in there for each one. I also added some additional resources like blog posts and other things that I've done. So you can purchase full access, and that's for 3 months. Then if you want more access, you would just purchase again. You also can purchase access just to particular workshops that you're interested in. And I do have some packages that if you want like access to 2 or 3, you get a slight discount for purchasing access to multiple. So I have a couple of different options in there. I also have a sneak peek on my website of what the actual workshops in there are. So if you're curious to see like what would you even get, head over to my website, ashleycuthbertson.com, and I have the waitlist link is there, and also a link to check out what's in there so that when it goes live on November 25th, you'll be ready to go ahead and get access. I do accept purchase orders and group orders. So I highly, highly, highly advocate that if you're a music teacher, that you get your school to pay for you, right? This is part of your professional learning, so your school should be supporting you, or your district. So if you are looking for access, I highly, highly, highly recommend talking with your principal now, talking with your finance supervisor now, so that you can get a purchase order together, because in order to get the discount, you have to have bought it by the end of the sale period. So I highly advocate for you to advocate for yourself. Ask for the funds to help you do this. There are PD funds there for you, specifically for professional learning. So tap into that, so that you can have access to that. So that's one thing I have coming up. The other thing I have coming up right after that is, well, I guess not right after, but in January, I'm going to be doing my next masterclass. So the first one I did in the summer, July and August 2022, was a huge success. It was so much fun. So I decided to do a winter masterclass. It's going to be a 3-part masterclass called Make Music Matter. And I'm specifically going to focus on curriculum design, centering culturally responsive practices. So if you're curious about like, well, how do I even like create culturally responsive curriculum? That's exactly what we're going to be doing in that masterclass. And so it's not until January, but I am going to be releasing the early bird registrations on November 28th. So if you are interested, on November 28th, I'm going to be doing a mini workshop of the masterclass to give you an idea of like what because the masterclass is 3 days. I didn't say that. It's 3 days. I think it's January 26th, 27th, 28th, I think. I hope so. It's the end of whatever that last full week of January. I know it's that. Hopefully I got the dates right. Dates are also on my website, ashleycuthbertson.com. Anyway, and so the mini workshop, which is totally free, and the registration is open also on my website for the mini workshop. The mini workshop is just going to give you an idea of like each of those 3 sessions. So if you're curious about what the masterclass is going to be like, I highly recommend that you come. It's totally free. That's going to be Monday, November 28th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we got 2 special things coming up. Everybody who comes to that free workshop, by the way, will have first access to my early registrations, which are at a much deeply discounted rate than the regular is going to be. And so I only have a certain number of those discounted registrations that I'm going to release. And so if you are set up for the workshop, you'll get the link first before everybody else does. That way, if you want to tap into the lower cost, you'll be able to do that. Again, I highly, highly recommend that you ask for your school or your district to support you with this. So if you are curious at all, like let me know. You can send me a DM or put it in the comments or go on my website at the contact page, because I do have the purchase order stuff already ready. So if you already know that you want your school or your district to pay for you, let me know that. There also is a discount for group bulk orders. And so if you're like a supervisor and you want to buy for your teachers, or you're a principal want to buy for your music team, let me know that I have a bulk order discount available as well. And so don't wait until the last second, because in order to get those discounted rates, it has to be done, finalized by December 7th. And then after that, the regular prices will go until January, whenever the actual masterclass is. So that's 2 exciting things I have going on, both the PD library, my January masterclass registrations will be open soon. And I've got that free workshop coming up on November 28th. So tap in. Thank you all so much for coming or watching the replay. I would love to have some more questions. And so feel free to let me know what questions you want me to answer. I'll be here again next Tuesday. I'm going to do this every Tuesday in November. And this has been kind of fun. So I might keep it going for a while. But I'll be here next Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, with another set of questions. Let me know what questions you want me to answer. Put them in my DMs, send me an email, put it in the comments. And I would be happy to answer those as well. All right. So I will see you all again next Tuesday. Be well, and I'll talk to you again soon.